The skills your career punished you for, the pausing, the listening, the refusing to force things, those are now worth more than your technical expertise. AI just made speed irrelevant. It made doing nothing a competitive advantage. And the four practices Taoism has been teaching for 2,500 years are suddenly functioning as hard edges in an economy that can't figure out what humans are still for. Let's start with the one that sounds the most useless. Skill 1. Deep listening. Ting. Here's the problem with being fast. AI can generate an answer before you've finished forming the question. It can summarize a document, draft a response, build a strategy, all before you've had your second coffee. So if your edge was always that you could think quickly and respond confidently, that edge is gone. The thing that replaced it isn't a tool. It's a capacity most professionals have been actively trained out of. The Taoist concept is called Ting. The character for it, in classical Chinese, combines the symbols for ear, eye, and heart together, which tells you something right away. This isn't just hearing, it's listening with the whole body, waiting for what hasn't been said yet, tracking what someone circles around but never quite lands on. Most professionals don't do this. They listen to reply. They're already forming their response while the other person is still talking, scanning for the moment they can jump in with something useful. AI does the exact same thing, just faster. The gap in the market right now is the person who doesn't do that, who can sit with discomfort longer than feels polite, who notices that someone keeps using the word alignment every time a specific person's name comes up, who catches the moment when the energy in a room shifts and someone goes quiet. What this actually looks like in practice isn't mystical. It's staying silent for 3 seconds after someone finishes speaking. Not to seem thoughtful, but because the real thing they meant sometimes comes out in those 3 seconds when they think you're still processing. It's tracking what someone avoids. If a CEO talks for 20 minutes about a strategy and never once mentions the team that has to execute it, that absence is data. It's noticing tone before content. Someone can say the words, "I'm fine with that decision," in a way that means the exact opposite, and a transcript will never catch it. Consider this: a consultant gets called into a company for what the leadership team describes as a communication problem. Teams aren't collaborating. Information isn't flowing. The obvious move is to run a workshop, build a new communication framework, maybe bring in a facilitator, but a deep listener spends the first 10 minutes of the kickoff meeting not saying much, just watching. And what they notice is that every time the VP of product speaks, the VP of engineering looks at the table. Not once does the engineering lead address product directly. The room has two people who don't trust each other, and everyone else has been building processes to work around that gap for 18 months. That's not a communication problem. That's a trust problem between two specific people. No communication framework fixes it, and no prompt generates that diagnosis. This is why Ting functions as a competitive edge right now. The attention economy has spent 15 years training everyone to react faster, speak louder, and fill silence immediately. Every platform is designed to reward output over absorption. The result is a professional world full of people generating more signal than anyone can actually process, and almost nobody left who knows how to sort through it. The person who can walk into a room, ask fewer questions than expected, and still leave with a clearer picture of what's actually broken, that person becomes someone no one wants to operate without. Ting isn't passive. That's the part people misread. It takes more effort to hold back a response than to give one. It takes real discipline to sit with not knowing long enough for the real problem to surface. In a room full of noise, choosing to listen instead of talk is the most active decision you can make, and the edge compounds. The more you practice it, the more you start catching things earlier, before they become crises, before the team breaks down, before the client walks. You become the person in the room who sees around corners, not because you're smarter, but because you're not too busy performing competence to actually notice what's happening. The second skill sounds even more useless until you see what it produces. Skill 2, stillness, Jing. There's a story we've all absorbed without realizing it. Motion equals progress. The busier you are, the more you must matter. Show your calendar, show your worth. And for a long time that story had enough truth in it to be functional. Output was measurable, presence was visible, activity at least signalled effort, even when it didn't produce results. That story is now working against you. The Taoist principle here is Jing, stillness, tranquility. Not sleep, not checked out, not passive. The image in the Tao Te Ching is muddy water. You can't see through it while it's moving. You can't filter it, analyze it, or act on what's in it. You have to let it settle. Clarity isn't something you think your way into. It's what appears when you stop churning. What's happening in most professional environments right now is the opposite of that. Everyone is reacting. Every competitor move triggers a strategy pivot. Every quarterly number triggers a reforecast. Every trend piece triggers a team offsite. The speed of information has made reactive decision-making feel like responsiveness, when a lot of the time it's just expensive noise, activity that consumes resources and produces movement without producing direction. The person who can hold still while that's happening has a completely different view of what's actually going on, not because they're ignoring the inputs, but because they're not letting the inputs run the clock. In practice, Jing doesn't require a meditation cushion. It looks like this. You get an email that makes your blood pressure spike, and you wait 10 minutes before you touch it, not because you're avoiding it, but because you know the version of you that responds in the first 60 seconds is operating on cortisol, not judgment. It looks like not changing your product strategy for a quarter just because a competitor shipped something that got press coverage. It looks like ending a meeting without a decision when the right decision hasn't shown up yet, rather than forcing one just to feel like the meeting had a point. There's actual physiology behind this. When the stress response fires, your cognitive field narrows, not metaphorically, but literally. The range of options you can perceive contracts. You start optimizing within a smaller solution space without knowing the space got smaller. Stillness interrupts that cycle. It lets the nervous system reset enough to see the wider picture again. The reason Jing is rare right now has nothing to do with discipline or character. It's structural. The entire attention economy runs on reaction. Every platform, every notification, every feed is engineered to make stillness feel like falling behind. LinkedIn rewards the person who posts every day. Slack rewards the fastest response time. The implicit message everywhere is that pausing is a risk. So people don't pause. They keep moving, keep reacting, keep generating, and the quality of their thinking quietly degrades the whole time. Here's what that creates in practice. Organizations full of fast-moving people who are all operating with narrowed cognitive fields, making decisions in compressed windows, and mistaking activity for traction. Into that environment, one person who can stay genuinely still under pressure doesn't just make better individual calls, they change the temperature of the room. The person who doesn't flinch when a deal goes sideways, who doesn't immediately reach for a solution when a problem surfaces, who can sit with uncertainty long enough to actually understand it. That person becomes a gravitational center. Other people start bringing problems to them, not just for answers, but for the quality of the space they create. This is the edge. Not that still people are smarter or more experienced. It's that they're seeing more of the board. When everyone else has narrowed their view to the 3 feet directly in front of them, the person operating from Jing has a wider frame, and in a complex environment, the person with the wider frame almost always makes the call that holds up 6 months later. Now here's where it gets counterintuitive. The third skill is about doing less on purpose. Skill 3, Wu Wei, non-forced action. Let's clear up the biggest misread about Wu Wei before it derails everything else. Wu Wei does not mean passive. It doesn't mean lazy, hands-off, or checked out. People hear non-action and they picture someone sitting on a park bench while their competitors ship product. That's not what this is. Wu Wei means not forcing outcomes that aren't ready to happen yet. The classical Taoist framing is water moving around a rock, not because water is weak, but because water doesn't waste energy fighting geometry. It reads what's actually in front of it and finds the path that's already open. The rock doesn't move. The water doesn't lose. It just doesn't push where pushing doesn't work. The reason this matters right now is that we've built an entire professional culture around forcing things. Overscheduled projects with deadlines set before anyone understood the scope. Sales cycles where the rep keeps pushing after the client has already mentally checked out just because the pipeline number requires it. Product launches timed to a fiscal calendar instead of to actual market readiness. Mergers that get pushed through because someone's bonus depends on closing by Q4, not because the integration is anywhere near ready. And then everyone wonders why things stall, why the launch underperforms, why the deal that seemed so close falls apart in the final week. A lot of the time the answer is that the timing was manufactured, not found. Wu Wei in a work context looks like this. You're 3 weeks into a project and it keeps hitting the same wall. Different meetings, same wall. The instinct is to add more process, more check-ins, more escalation paths, but the person operating from Wu Wei asks a different question. Does this project need more intervention, or does it need room to breathe? Sometimes the thing that's blocking progress is the weight of all the management sitting on top of it. It also looks like stopping a sales conversation at the right moment. You've made the case. The client is thinking, the worst move is to fill that silence with another feature or another discount. Wu Wei is knowing that the most powerful thing you can do right now is stop talking and let them arrive at the conclusion on their own. Pushing at that point doesn't accelerate the decision. It creates resistance, and in a negotiation, there are moments where pulling back entirely is the move that creates forward motion, not as a tactic, not as a manipulation, but because the deal genuinely needs space to settle before the next step can happen. The person who can recognize that moment and act on it, rather than interpreting any pause as a threat to be countered, has a skill that almost no one develops on purpose. Here's where the AI parallel gets interesting. AI will generate 40 versions of a solution on demand, 40 options ranked by whatever metric you give it, delivered before you've finished stretching. The scarcity isn't options anymore. The scarce thing is knowing which option not to pursue and when to wait rather than act on any of them. Wu Wei is exactly that discipline. The capacity to let 40 doors sit in front of you, recognize that none of them are ready to open yet, and not force one just because you have a tool capable of kicking it down. If you've been working long enough, you probably have the scar tissue for this already. You've seen what happens when someone pushed a deal that needed 3 more months. You've watched a product launch into a market that would have been ready 18 months later but wasn't ready then. You've felt the particular exhaustion of keeping something alive past the point where it wanted to die. That experience isn't pessimism, it's pattern recognition. And pattern recognition about timing is exactly what Wu Wei trains. Wu Wei isn't inaction, it's the discipline to let the right moment arrive instead of manufacturing a worse one. And in an economy where the ability to generate action is now essentially free, the ability to withhold it is worth considerably more than it used to be. The last skill is the one that ties all three together, and it's the one most people have spent their whole career trying to eliminate. Skill 4. Emptying the cup. Ju. There's a story in Zen, borrowed freely by Taoism, about a scholar who visits a master and spends the whole conversation explaining what he already knows. The master starts pouring tea into the scholar's cup and keeps pouring even after it's full, tea spilling across the table. The scholar says, "Obviously you can't pour more into a full cup." The master says, "Correct, you can't either." That story gets quoted so often it's become wallpaper. But the concept underneath it, what the Taoists call shu, emptiness or receptivity, is not a feel-good metaphor. It's a diagnostic. And right now, it's diagnosing most experienced professionals. The problem isn't that people with long track records are arrogant. It's subtler than that. The more you've succeeded with a particular way of thinking, the more invisible that framework becomes. You stop seeing it as a lens. You start seeing it as reality. New information comes in, and without realizing it, you're running it through a filter built on everything that worked before 2020, before the current tool set existed, before the market looked the way it looks now. You're not ignoring the new data. You're translating it into a language your existing model can understand, which means you're losing exactly the parts of it that don't fit. This is where the 2026 context bites hard. The tools changed, the roles changed, the workflows, the hiring patterns, the customer expectations, all of it shifted faster than any framework as built in the previous era can cleanly handle. And the people who are struggling most aren't the ones with the least experience, they're the ones with the most, because their track record feels like proof that their model is correct. Every past success is an argument against emptying the cup. What shu actually requires isn't pretending you have no experience. It's not performing beginner's mind as a kind of humility theatre. It's a specific temporary suspension of your conclusions, long enough to actually hear what's different this time. Not how does this fit what I know, but what is this if I set down what I know for a minute? That's harder than it sounds, especially when the people around you are treating your experience as the answer. You're the one who's been through multiple cycles, who knows how markets move, who's seen a dozen versions of this problem. The institutional pressure is to have the answer. Shu asks you to hold that answer loosely enough that a better one can show up. One question that creates this opening: what would I believe about this if I had never seen anything like it before? Not as a rhetorical exercise, but as a genuine attempt to catch the assumptions you've been treating as facts. Run it before a strategy meeting. Run it when a new tool lands on your desk and your first instinct is to fit it to a workflow you already have. Run it when you find yourself explaining why something won't work before you've fully understood what it is. The compounding advantage here is real, and it's not obvious until you see it play out across a few years. Someone who can genuinely empty and refill their mental model every 18 months will outlearn anyone who's optimizing a fixed system, no matter how good that system is. The world is changing faster than any fixed model can keep up with. The person who knows how to not know on purpose, who can move from full to empty and refill with something current, stays adaptive in a way that experience alone doesn't guarantee. Experience tells you what worked. Shu keeps you honest about whether it still does. These four capacities, listening before responding, holding still while the room reacts, waiting for the right moment instead of forcing one, and emptying out enough to actually learn something new. None of them sound like competitive advantages. That's been the problem with them for a long time. They don't show up on a resume. They don't generate visible output. They look from the outside like the opposite of hustle. But the economy just repriced human skills. The things that are hard to automate aren't the ones that require more processing power. They're the ones that require genuine presence, judgment, and the kind of receptivity that Taoism has been training for 2,500 years. If you want to go deeper on any of these, I've got a video on Wu Wei specifically that breaks down how to actually apply it when you're under deadline pressure, link is right there. And if this framing is new to you, subscribe, because this is exactly the kind of thing we keep coming back to on this channel.